James. So I'm going to welcome everybody who is here in person and watching the recording to this Campion webinar. Today we're hearing from Robert Beardwood at Insight to talk about the new VCE curriculum and the resources that are available for English and some of the English subjects. So we are recording this session. I know a large number of people have opted to watch the recording, so welcome to you as well. For those who are here in person, if you have questions, do please pop them in the chat and I will keep an eye on those. First, we're just going to have a quick welcome from James Cathro, who's the MD of Campion.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining. My name is James Cathro and I'm the Managing Director of Campion Education. Campion are all about making teaching and learning as easy as possible for schools. Delivering education has never been so complex and there's a world of new tools available, including Campion's own digital MyConnect 2 to help prepare students for their future. Campion is a family-owned company and I've been the MD for more years than I like to remember. But I've had the privilege of visiting many schools, meeting many teachers over the years and finding out about what schools need, what students need, where education resources and learning pedagogy need to go. I hope you get a lot out of this webinar series, so let's jump in.
Thank you very much, James. And I should have said, I'm Susanna Bowen. I work at Campion and I'm a fan of English. I have both an undergraduate and a master's in English. So I'm going to be very excited to see how the young people are going to get taught moving forward. So Robert is the publisher for Insight. Robert, I'll pass over to you. So please take it away.
Thanks, Susanna. I'll just start sharing my PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully everyone can see that opening slide. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, I think, and I'll be talking about the changes to the study designs for English, EAL, and just for a very short time, literature. And also talking about the new resources that Insight's been developing for these, for the new study designs. Also, I'll talk about some of the changes and show some of the approaches that we've taken in English Year 11, which is our new textbook for Year 11 English in Victoria. Also briefly talk about some of the changes to EAL where they vary from mainstream English, and then talk briefly about VCE literature. There's been a little bit of uncertainty about the time frame for the implementation of these courses, partly I think because it's different for literature and English. So English will be a staged implementation. And so the new course begins at Year 11 next year and then Year 12 in 2024. And the study design is accredited until 2027, so we have a few years to get used to it. The text list for 2024 will be released at the end of this year. Obviously, we'll have some new List 1 texts for Area Study 1, but probably what's of more interest will be the mentor texts for the framework of ideas for Unit 3 Area of Study 2. So I'll talk a little bit more about mentor texts in a little while. The other thing a lot of people are interested in is the exam. We won't have a sample exam from the VCEA until late next year, so it won't be until after next year's Year 12 actually sit their final exam. So that's a little way off. A lot of people are going to be asking at various points in time, how will the new area of study be assessed? And unfortunately, we don't have an answer to that just yet. However, they have made clear that the format of the current exam, there are 3 sections and 3 hours, and that will stay the same. There'll be a section for the text responses, there'll be a question for the new area of study, and there'll be a question for the argument and persuasive language study. So that looks like the format of the exam will stay the same, but exactly how they'll ask questions for the new area study is probably the big unknown. The main new elements of the English study design. In Unit 1, students will be able to write a personal response to their set text. It's a bit of a one-off. In Units 2, 3 and 4, the same area of study will be assessed by an analytical essay, and we'd have to imagine that's how it will be in the final exam as well. The new area of study is called Crafting Texts in Unit 1, and in Year 12, in Unit 3, it's called Creating Text, but they work much the same way. And the assessment task is to create 2 written texts and a description of writing processes or a reflective commentary. 3 mentor texts need to be set by the school for in-depth study. Students will be encouraged to read a lot more widely than just 3 texts. And finally, changes to this study of persuasive texts. It's really quite similar to how it is at the moment, and that will be done in Unit 2 and in Unit 4. There's a bit more emphasis in the new study design on audio and audio-visual texts, and there's also an opening up of the opportunities for the oral presentation, which usually is done as a speech to the class, but it can be done as part of a debate or discussion or a dialogue if the school decides that that's a good way to do the oral presentation. So moving into this book, which has just been released, English Year 11 VCE Units 1 and 2. And a couple of changes to previous Year 11 textbooks from us. We've lowered the price, so hopefully that's good. And every copy of the book, the print book, comes with the digital book as well. And in addition, there are web links and QR codes throughout that'll help students access extra resources and relevant online material, which I'll show you some sample pages shortly. Area of Study 1 hasn't changed too much, except for that new assessment task where students can respond by writing a personal response. There are a few text selection requirements that I've just written there. I know it's a little bit of text on the slide, but there's a few things to keep in mind when you are selecting texts for Year 11 and then for Year 12. So it'll be five texts set all together, 3 mentor texts for Area Study 2 and 1 text for Area Study 1 in each of Unit 1 and Unit 2. So that's the 5 texts. Only one of them can be a film or a graphic novel, and either one of the 2 set texts for Area Study 1 or 2 of the 3 mentor texts for Area Study 2 must be Australian. So that's an Australian requirement, and that carries through to Year 12 as well. What is a personal response? We've received this question a few times. So it's a combination of personal reflections and observations with conventional close analysis, doing some work with textual detail, discussing quotes from the text, and using meta language to do the usual kinds of analysis. For English Year 11, I commissioned 3 sample personal responses, and each writer chose to write a fairly conventional essay structure, but using the first person to include those personal reflective elements. And the other thing that we decided to do was to use a topic. Now, there's no requirement in the study design that students have to do this. It'll really be up to how teachers want to set this task for students as to whether they set a topic or make it quite open-ended. We felt a prompt of some kind would just help students to focus their writing. So here's an example from the textbook. The text is Fahrenheit 451, and the topic is discuss the ways in which technology can be used for control in both Fahrenheit 451 and your own experience. There really are a lot of ways that prompts could be worded. There's nothing, there's nothing set in stone about it. It's unlikely to be a task that turns up in the final exam, so it really is completely up to the cohort and the teacher. But that's just the opening paragraph. You can see that it begins with a fairly general statement and then gradually moves into the text and the use of first person to reflect on real world situations. So it's a bit of a blend of personal observations, reflections on personal experiences, and close attention to the text. There's no actual requirement in the study design for this to be written as an essay. It just seems like the most logical format the students are going to write in, given that they're going to have to write analytical essays in units 2, 3 and 4. The crafting text is the new area of study. So the comparative part of the course that we've had for a few years is going out. Students will produce 2 written texts and a description of the writing processes, and there'll be 3 mentor texts set for in-depth study. So the mentor text will be relatively short. When eventually we do see the text list for 2024, there'll be prescribed texts of somewhere around 5,000 words, been suggested as the usual length for a mentor text, but they can be shorter. If you would like to use a novel as a mentor text, then the idea is you would just use a short section from it. Short stories can make good mentor texts, and also various online forms such as blog posts. And the idea is to set, a mentor text that works as a good model for students to follow. So if they're going to be writing a short story, it makes sense for them to have a look at, effective short stories and to, use those as the basis and sources of inspiration. The task doesn't require students to write about mentor texts or even refer to them explicitly. The mentor texts are simply there as models and inspiration. And yeah, I mean, how many mentor texts each school does is going to vary quite a lot, and the willingness of students to read will also be a factor. But 3 mentor texts need to be set for in-depth study. Another interesting part of the study design for this new area of study is that the four purposes are explained in some detail: to express, to explain, to reflect, and to argue. And so students need to show that they're aware of the purpose that they're writing for, and they can refer to that purpose in their reflective commentary, their description of the writing processes, where they explain choices that they've made in relation to the purpose for their writing. There really is a very wide range of text types that they can write in. They can write quite imaginatively, they can write more persuasively, they can write in reflective or expository modes. So in English Year 11, we have devoted a chapter to explaining quite a number of different text types. So here's just a spread from the book showing, this is a spread showing students the features of blogs. And you can see there's a QR code. And so the idea is that if students are using the print book, they can use a phone to scan the code, and that will take them to whatever the additional resource is for that part of the book. If they're using the book in a digital form, the digital version of the book, then they can click on the hyperlink that'll take them to the same place. Some of the additional resources are video summaries and explanations. Some of them are relevant web pages with material that students can analyse. There are some template proformas to help them summarise and organise material. And there are some additional sample responses as well. So it's all accessed through those QR codes and hyperlinks. We should also refer to the activities, which you can see at the bottom right of that spread. There are activities all the way through the book to encourage students to develop their own writing, starting with often quite simple questions, short answer questions, and then developing into more extended pieces of writing. The final part about crafting texts that it's worth talking a little bit about is the idea of a key idea. So in Year 12, there's a framework of ideas, and the 4 key ideas are writing about country, writing about protest, writing about personal journeys, and writing about play. Those 4 key ideas are off limits for Year 11. And the idea of the idea, I mean, this is a little bit evocative of the contexts, but it's not as central to the writing as the context ideas were. It simply provides a sort of a focus for class discussions and for the mentor text to sort of have some relationship with the key idea. But the main focus of this area of study is to get students writing really coherent, well-structured, well-expressed pieces of writing. So the idea is really just a scaffolding device. But it does look like, as if in preparation for Year 12, schools will set a key idea for Year 11 and 3 mentor texts that are somehow relevant to that key idea. So avoiding the Year 12 key ideas, we've chosen 5 for English Year 11, writing about crisis, writing about futures, writing about identity, writing about nature, and writing about the past. And again, the sample spread from the textbook. So there's a few pages, dedicated to each of our key ideas, and we've included a list of mentor texts, just suggested mentor texts, and we've also included an extract with some annotations to show the features relevant to the key idea, and there are also activities to help students develop writing in response to that key idea. So the textbook really models approaches. As a teacher, you can either choose one of these key ideas and follow it through, or it can just work as a model for how students might develop their writing in relation to another key idea. There are lots of suggested mentor texts. We've included as many excerpts as possible of different kinds of texts. So hopefully there's something useful in all of those to guide your own selections of mentor texts and supplementary texts. We tried to keep the mentor texts basically written and not too multimodal, but I think there'll be a place for things like film and multimodal text, graphic novels as well, because these are all ways of expressing ideas and using words to tell stories, whether it's the printed word on the page or it's an online text or it's words accompanied by moving images. And finally, in the textbook, we do include a few complete sample responses. So this is the opening of one, which is a short story in response to the key idea of writing about crisis. And there's a little bit of discussion there about the way in which mentor text has been used as a springboard for this particular piece of writing. So we have four complete sample responses in the book and a couple more available as online access through the QR codes and the web links. Finally, Unit 2, Area of Study 2 hasn't had too many changes. So I'm just going to scoot through this material a little bit more quickly. Yes, I think as I mentioned before, the oral task can be done in in more different ways, including class discussions and debates. The issue in Year 11 should be local and or national. In Unit 4, it can be national or international. And as I said, there's much more emphasis on the study of audio and audiovisual text. So in the Unit 4 SAC, one of the analysed texts must be audio or audiovisual. It's a requirement that we haven't had before. The assessment tasks for Unit 2 are not prescribed, but the schools will probably try to prepare students for the Year 12 task.
Robert, we've got a quick query in the chat just before you move on.
Excellent.
Do you think it would be appropriate to use parts of the U101 text as one of the mentor texts?
I'm not quite sure what that's referring to. Parts of.
Yeah, I think so. Going back to the mentor texts, would it be, maybe you could just talk a bit more about how you'd select your mentor texts? Unit 1, Outcome 1 text. Could you use a Unit 1, Outcome 1 text as a mentor text?
Probably not. I think that the texts have to be discrete in the. So if whatever you did for Outcome 1, you would have to choose different texts for the mentor text. There needs to be 5 texts set across the year. But it could be something that you have that has been used for text study in the past, that you're no longer, because the number of texts has been reduced quite significantly. We're going from four texts being studied down to 2, with the mentor text all being much shorter than the extended pieces of writing we've had in the past. So it may be that you're no longer having to use, I don't know, what can I think of? Year of Wonders, for instance, you may not be using that as a set text, but you might use a chapter from Year of Wonders as a mentor text as an example of writing about the past. So that may be something that happens, but it would just be an excerpt, just a chapter or a few pages that would serve as a model of a particular kind of writing.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
I've just got a few pages from English Year 11 to show how we've tackled a few things. Obviously, with the audio and audio-visual text requirement, it's a bit hard to do that on the printed page. So again, we've used these QR codes to connect students to relevant online material, and included here is just some annotations of some features of the audio. This is a speech by Greta Thunberg, which is readily available online, and the annotations show how students can look for particular audio features, which is something that they would need to comment on if they were analysing a speech, for instance. Another interesting part of the study design is that in Unit 2, the assessment task can be to create an annotated persuasive text or a set of annotated persuasive texts. So we've provided a little model and some guidelines for how detailed annotations can be written. And of course, annotating a text, even if their end task is to write a complete analysis, annotating a text in detail is a really useful first step. And finally, another excerpt from the book is showing how a debate could be used to deal with an issue and to enable students to present a point of view on an issue. The interesting thing with the debate, of course, is that you're mostly responding to what somebody else has said. So that's a slightly different task compared with just presenting all your material in advance and then giving the speech. In this case, you're responding to what a previous speaker has said. So there's some listening and responding skills that are in there that are really good to develop as well, and may just make for a slightly more dynamic experience if schools are trying out this new way of assessing the oral task. The EAL course has been made in some ways closer to the English course, and this is in recognition of the fact that there's a large number of classrooms that contain both mainstream English and EAL students. So basically the tasks are the areas of study match, and the tasks are quite similar, but with a few variations. So for instance, in the text response section of the course, students can study extracts from a text rather than the complete text. And then in their response, they can create a note form summary of key connections and ideas. That's the personal response task. They can produce a note form summary rather than a complete piece of extended writing. In Area of Study 2, the crafting texts area of study, the two created texts remain the same with EAL, but instead of a description of the writing process, the task is that they would write a set of annotations on the created texts. When we come back to Area of Study 1 in Unit 2, again, there's no requirement for EAL students to read a complete text, obviously depending on the student's motivations and the teacher and the cohort, but extracts can be studied, and instead of writing a complete essay, students can create a detailed mind map. And there are similar note form summaries and annotated options available for the study of argument and persuasive language as well. So there are just those assessment tasks can vary a little bit for EAL compared to English, but otherwise the courses really follow each other very closely. So just a couple of examples from the EAL book, which is available now and set up extremely similarly to the mainstream English book. Here's just a short example of a note form summary. That's just a small part of it. It's this summary goes on for well over a page from memory. So the student explores personal connections to the novel Animal Farm by George Orwell, and the student has identified a number of key ideas in the texts, and then the bullet points start to explore some personal connections as well as discussing close textual detail. So it's an example of how that task has been approached in EAL. And this is an example of an annotated visual text, which is another of the assessment options listed for EAL. We've just given an example of a Mark Knight cartoon, which has got lots of annotations around it, probably more than an EAL student would normally create, but it just shows what's possible. Yeah, you can see the amount of detail that you can actually fit into the annotation if you do it carefully and thoroughly. There are two more books that we're releasing this year. The next one that will come out is Explore and Analyse Argument, and this is the successor title to Argument and Persuasive Language, which has been widely used from Year 9 or from Year 10, and schools get students to keep it from those years whenever they buy it until the end of Year 12. So it does provide very accessible explanations, but also takes students right through to the level of detail they're required to write an analysis of persuasive language and argument, or to present their own point of view. It's closely based on Area Study 2 in Units 2 and 4. And again, like the 2 Year 11 books, it includes web links and QR codes throughout to access online material. Certainly more so than English Year 11, that there's an extremely wide range of media texts in Explore and Analyse Argument. It's very mixed, extremely wide range of issues, not just serious issues. Hopefully plenty of things that teenagers will find interesting and relevant. And finally, just a little bit about literature, which is changing. So the new course will come in at both Year 11 and Year 12 next year. There are changes in Unit 1, Unit 2 and Unit 3. And so we're updating literature for senior students and releasing a 6th edition, probably late September, early October. That should be available. We won't have an exam for literature until right at the end of this year or early next year. The interesting thing with the exam will be what happens to Section A. So it looks like the close analysis task in Section B will stay the same, but in Section A there will be a new sort of question that will line up with Unit 3 developing interpretations. So that's a slightly altered task from the perspectives. There's no requirement to use a theoretical perspective. It's one way to do the task, but it's not the only way to do the task. So there's a little bit more scope for teachers to approach interpreting a text. So that's literature for senior students, the 6th edition. And finally, the other set of resources for next year's English is our text guide. So we're just continuing to produce new text guides on the new text for the English text list, which will be text list 1. So if you're doing Year 12 English next year, it remains the same. It'll still have the comparisons. It's the same set of comparisons as we have at the moment. That list is not changing, but there will be new texts on text list 1 next year. And that's the list there. And those 7 text guides will come out near the end of the year. And I think that's all I have.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Robert. I really enjoyed that. I liked seeing, particularly, I think, seeing the screenshots of what the pages are going to look like around things like the visual texts and the animations. Really good to see how we can support those. I don't know if anyone else who's live on the call has any other queries that can be popped in the chat. But if not, we'll probably let you go and let everyone get back to their afternoon. So thank you so much. The recording will be sent out to everyone who's registered. And yeah, really appreciate your time, Robert, for sharing that information. Very helpful.
Okay, thanks, Susanna.
Okay,
thanks everyone
thank you.
for joining.
Good night, everyone.